Hey, everybody. You're listening to episode 2 of Business Lunch. This is a podcast for anyone who wants to not think about work while thinking about work. We discuss some of the biggest issues facing the wide world of business management today. Also, we talk about lunch.
Speaking about lunch, so last week we drew some pictures. Will drew pictures. We tried to guess what Will was having for lunch, and my best guess was some type of fireworks. I mean, that's what it looked like to me. So later on today, before we finish, we'll discuss what's the hottest thing that any of us have ever eaten. So we'll go from there and bring that up, so we stay in tune with our business and lunch discussion.
Now, Will, you have a question about this?
Yeah, so when we say the hottest thing, are we referring to spicy as in the spiciness of something, or are we referring to strictly temperature of the hottest thing we've ever eaten?
You call.
Yeah,
you make the call.
You make the call.
You make the call.
Okay, well, let's make the call when we get there.
You make the call.
Maybe we can share both. Okay, so that's coming up later in the episode.
All right.
Okay. For today, we're going to be talking about work-life balance. Is work-life balance really a myth, or is it something that's actually achievable? This topic came to us in response to an article that Robert Glazer wrote on LinkedIn last week. He's the founder and CEO of Acceleration Partners. So he wrote this article called "It's Time to End the Work-Life Balance Myth." In the article, he kind of approaches this subject from a really different angle. So he argues that the concept of work-life balance doesn't really exist at all. Instead, he says that we want to be present in our life at work and outside of work. And when we're doing that, we're never really going to be able to achieve balance between the two. So instead, he argues for more integration between work and life, which he says is really made up of a bunch of different moments. So this article generated a lot of interest from readers. There were, a lot of comments on this article, and I mean, I think it makes sense that there were, because people are interested in work-life balance for themselves. Thinking about that, how they can apply it, and so here's someone saying, work-life balance, you've been talking about it, thinking about it, but it's not even a thing. So I want to just get right into it and ask you guys what you think about this concept. Work-life balance, does it exist?
I mean, I think to say, does it exist, you first have to say, what is a work-life balance? I mean, really, what is a balance of work and life? Is saying that, you can only work for so much, and then you have your personal life after that. Can they be blended together? Is it just about the time you spend to each to be able to accomplish everything that you need to accomplish?
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, I think if you read some of the responses in there, people were trying to define that themselves, trying to figure out whether that meant time, right? Or does that mean quality and quantity, So time, right? So you can spend 8 hours at work, and you could spend 8 hours at home, but is that truly a balance at the end of the day, just because it's time? And I think one of the things that Robert was trying to put is that it's about the quality of that time and kind of what you're doing. But I'll go a little further and say I hated the word integration, right? So I agree with him a little bit, but I hate the word integration only because, to me, integration kind of conjures up, I'm in the middle of something and I'm going to take phone calls and do stuff. That's integrated. That's not spending that quality time that he talks about in his article of doing it. So I hate the word integration. I still kind of lean towards balance or harmony or something like that,
I know, and I think a lot of it also has to depend on the person too, and the specific events of it, and then what type of flexibility do you have with the people around you, whether it's your life situations or your work situations. The person, I'm a much more of a multitasker person as it is anyway. Mm-hmm. I'm actually don't think I'm that great at doing things for blocks of time period. So I'm fine when there's overflow in each. I'm good at switching from one thing to the other. So I don't necessarily need to have that block off of, dedicating 8 hours directly here and then not allowing for a mix between the two. But again, that's just me.
Yeah, I think one thing I like to think about with work-life balance is that it shouldn't be difficult. when I'm trying to achieve it, when I'm trying to think about my time at work and outside of work, I want to feel good about both. And one of the things that this article does is it talks about if there's no such thing as balance, Robert Glazer says it's actually more like a puzzle. And that made me stop for a little bit. And I was like, wait, puzzles are hard and puzzles take a really long time and they're composed of all these different pieces. Now I get that because I think our life is really composed of all these different moments that in some ways, yes, we're trying to fit together, but I like the concept of balance because it's more of a mantra. It's like, I know I may not always achieve it, but I like to try and I like to think in simplistic terms. I'm balancing work and I'm balancing life, and that's all I really want to think about. And beyond that, I'll try to integrate, if I can, but I don't want to feel like I'm putting a puzzle together every day because I'm going to start to get really stressed out.
I would agree with that. I would agree 100% with that. And so, we talk about the word balance, and balance has more than one definition of balance, right? Balance, and most people think of it as two equal parts, right? To be balanced, this has to be this and this has to be that, and they have to equal. But that's not correct. I mean, a balance can be an appropriate amount, right? It doesn't have to be, as long as that amount is appropriate for each. You're given the appropriate amount of time to work and to family, life, and all those other things. And one might have one in terms of time, one might be given more, but it's about the quality and making it right and making it proportionate at each to make sure you're doing justice for each. But they may not be in balance in terms of time, right? I might spend 8 hours, 10 hours at work. I might spend 6 hours doing family things, but it's quality 6 hours that were well spent, focused on family, friends, and whatever else we're doing. So I think in my world, in my little mind, that there can be a balance, and it's just about figuring out what's the right balance for you.
And I think a part of it has to do too is, how actually required are you to deal with this work situation after you leave the office for the day too? Because, that's part of this is that work comes up after you leave the office. Back in the days before computers and technology, once, that the end of the day hit, you went home, there wasn't a way to get a hold of you. There were no emails on your phones for you to see. Now you get this email, you're compelled to check. And then what happens at that point? What do you do? Yeah. Do you answer it? Do you not answer it? Are you comfortable not answering it, or are you comfortable answering it and then getting back to whatever it is that you were doing? How much time is that going to take away from you?
Well, that's about priority for me, right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think he makes this comment about spending what is it called, the right amount of time in each area, and I forget exactly what his quote was. Let's see if I have it here. He talks about seeking meaningful, uninterrupted time, right? Or experiences. He leaves out the word time. He talks about experiences, and that's what it's about. That doesn't mean I can't answer emails or take calls at night, but not during the time that I'm spending focus time, right? So I can always answer later, and I've done that. And I think we've all probably had positions where you had to do stuff at night and and do that, but not during the time I'm spending focus time. If I've got focus time with family, friends, daughters, sons, whatever that may be, that's the time I do that. Those emails and phone calls can pile up, and I'll get to those once everybody goes to bed, maybe, or carve out that time. For me, that's the balance, right? Because I get it. You can't just drop work altogether sometimes, depending on your position. So you'll have to answer those sometime, but try to stay uninterrupted and focused, I think, is the key.
And I think when we're doing meaningful work and when we like what we're doing, we sometimes find work to be therapeutic in our life. Let me share a quick story here. So I was once on a date. We went to see a horror movie, and turns out, time of the day we saw it, we're the only two people in the theater. And my date decides that she has to go to the bathroom about half an hour in, and it's just so happens that this is like at the absolute scariest part of the movie. So now I'm in the movie theater, absolutely alone, I'm by myself, and she's gone for, what seems like an eternity. And now all the scary stuff is coming up on the screen, and I don't know what to do. So, as any normal person would do, I take out my phone and I open up my email, and I've got 20 work emails, and I couldn't be more thankful in that moment. I start answering my work emails so I don't have to pay attention to the screen, and it was great. It was the best work I've ever done. She came back and she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm doing work. It's too scary. You left me alone."
We can call that selective balance.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, before we get to our next segment, which I'd like maybe each of us to share one piece of advice that we would give to somebody else for how to achieve a balance, since we all do seem to agree that it exists for us and could probably exist for everybody in some way. Let's do that in a bit, but before we get there, let's get to our lunch topic here. What is the hottest thing all of us have eaten? Will, have you decided spicy or hot?
I'm going to go with hot, and I think the easiest answer for that is Elio's pizza. I mean, that is pretty much liquid fire on some form of bread, and it's delicious nonetheless, but it is definitely hot, and I now have burned, scarred roof of my mouth.
Here's a controversial idea. Is it Elio's or Elio's? Because I could never decide.
You know what? I think Elio's might be right, but I like Elio's more.
Okay, yeah, I think I call it both.
Now that you're making me think about it, I'm thinking of like eels and SpaghettiOs at the same time, which is not tasty.
It's a bad lunch topic.
It's definitely from Paulsboro. I'm going to go with spicy, even though.
Okay, good. Yeah, I like that.
Spicy. So I like to cook spaghetti or cook my sauce for spaghetti from scratch. So I built it from scratch one day, and I went to the grocery store and picked out some peppers because I wanted a little spice and heat in the peppers. And I picked up some jalapenos, some habaneros, and by accident, a ghost pepper. So these were all in my sauce, and I had no idea. I was tasting it. Wasn't too bad. Got to the end of it, poured me a plate, and my mouth was on fire. I mean, like never before. I had to throw it all out. So you're talking about a monster pot of spaghetti sauce. It's just gone. That was the hottest thing that I've ever tasted spice-wise.
I have a similar story. I once purchased ghost pepper salt, and I thought, okay, well, I know ghost peppers are supposed to be really hot, but it's salt and it's all mixed in there, so it should be okay. And I don't remember what the food was, but I put too much on it. And similar story, I took one bite and I was like, okay, I've got to throw this out. Why did I do this to myself? I like spicy food, but not so spicy that I can't taste the thing.
Enjoy it, right? Yeah,
right.
Yeah. No, I did the same thing.
So Will, do you want to add spicy now that we're talking about it?
I mean, I still stand by my answer, but as far as spicy is concerned,
of course you do.
It would have to be a pasta sauce I made one time. I use, I like to arrabbiata sauce. I like that. I had that once before. It's a nice spicy Italian sauce, almost like a salsa, delicious. So try to recreate it. Sometimes I add in those really rare hot sauces into my pasta mix. And that was probably the hottest thing of it, especially when I couple it with spicy Italian sausage on top of that too.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a spicy pasta sauce that took a while to eat.
It's crazy how quickly adding things in can turn hot.
Yeah, it's scary. And then, you get disappointed when you're like, oh, this is going to be so much fun. It's going to be spicy. I'm going to love it. And then you throw your food in the garbage. Nobody likes that. Okay. Well, let's get to the last part of this episode 2. One piece of advice we have for our listeners about the best way to achieve a work-life balance.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because it's so different for everybody, right? But the one thing I do is when I do go home, when I get home, it's about spending time with loved ones, right? So I do that. We sit, we have dinner together. We talk about the day, we watch news, we chat about what the current events are, what's going on. So I kind of carve that time out every day to make sure that happens after work because, my God, you're at work 8 hours. How do you balance 8 more hours without going to bed at some point? And I think I do it just by spending that quality, 3 or 4 hours that you have before maybe you go to bed doing that. And then, boom, you're right on top of emails and finish off and go to bed. And then in the morning, I pick up back where I left off in terms of work because I get up very early, do exercise, get up early, and then go ahead and start work before, and then spend time I spend about, half hour, 45 minutes in the morning as well. So that works for me.
Great, Will.
I'm going to actually take a word that you said earlier. And for me, it's not so much about balance. To me, it's more about prioritization and how you're choosing to prioritize things. Obviously, when you're at work, it's a lot harder to prioritize family and home life first. So most of that time, work is generally getting the prioritization of that. And, the flip side of that is when at home, I generally prioritize family things at that point. Now, when there is a cross, you just have to learn and understand where and when to prioritize and just make decisions, get in the habit of understanding what is the most important thing for your life and understanding that and making choices based off of what's the most important thing for you to do right now.
Yeah, that's a great advice. I mean, for me, it kind of comes down to something as simple as like what you do in your life and like what you do in your work. And if you like both, you're probably not going to notice. I think sometimes work-life balance can be a kind of paradox where we're working really hard to achieve it, and that's not the end that we want. And instead, the work to achieve it becomes something that gets in the way of creating a type of balance. So when I really like what I'm doing in my life and I really like what I'm doing in my work, I wouldn't necessarily say they blend together seamlessly, but I don't notice as much. And sometimes when we don't notice and we don't have to think about this as much, we find that we've achieved some of the balance that we're searching for.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's excellent. But I know we've got to probably head out quickly. But one of the things about that is, while I love what I do, I love everything's great. But sometimes it's not about what we think we're giving enough time to. It's outside influences outside of that, whether it's a loved one at home, it's kids. We think we're given the proper balance. We feel good, but there's an outside influence where it doesn't feel like they're getting enough, right? So that's when you have to kind of relook at that as well and kind of prioritize around that. So I like your guys' statements about prioritization and just being flexible enough to know that if someone else says they're not getting enough, is just to take a look at that. Because while you may feel so, they may not.
And sometimes we just have to remind ourselves about this. That's why it's such a great topic.
Yes.
We can come back to this at any point in our lives and have that conversation and have those thoughts about it. And if we need to redirect ourselves, then we can do that. It's kind of, an ongoing project. That's what our lives are too. Okay, well, everybody. Well, thanks a lot. I want to remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Business by Miles. And we look forward to seeing you next time, and we'll talk about another lunch and another topic. So we'll see you soon.